The boarding encounter. Dr. Maya Thompson's presence in the first-class cabin exuded a quiet confidence. She was a beacon of accomplishment, her life a testament to resilience, determination, and unrelenting excellence. At just 37 years old, she had achieved what many could only dream of, a position as one of the country's top trauma surgeons at New York Presbyterian Hospital. The path had not been easy, growing up in Harlem as the daughter of a nurse and a schoolteacher. She had worked tirelessly, facing barriers others couldn't imagine, but today, as she boarded her flight to Miami, she allowed herself a rare indulgence, a well-deserved vacation. Maya adjusted her carry-on and found her seat near the window in the first-class section. The plush seat felt foreign to her, she rarely allowed herself such luxury. As she placed her bag in the overhead compartment, she took a moment to admire the peace that had eluded her for years. It wasn't often that she had time to reflect. The cabin began to fill with passengers. Businesspeople with crisp suits and laptops, a couple in casual vacation attire, and a middle-aged man who exuded an air of entitlement. He stormed down the aisle, dragging a suitcase that was clearly too large for the overhead bin. His grumbling and frustrated muttering drew the attention of several passengers. Maya observed him silently. His red, flushed face and irritated demeanor spoke volumes. Instinctively, her years of working under pressure kicked in. "Excuse me, sir," she offered kindly, "would you like some help with that?" The man barely spared her a glance before snapping, "No, I've got it." His tone was dismissive, his frustration bubbling over. A flight attendant approached, her professional smile intact. "Sir, I'm sorry, but this bag won't fit in the overhead bin. I'll need to check it for you." He let out a loud sigh, clearly annoyed, and relinquished the bag. "Fine," he muttered. Settling heavily into the seat beside Maya, he adjusted his jacket and gave an exasperated huff. Maya glanced sideways, offering a polite smile before turning her attention to the window. The man, however, seemed determined to make his presence known. "First class isn't what it used to be," he grumbled, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Maya nodded politely, hoping to avoid further conversation, but the man pressed on. "What brings you to Miami?" he asked, his tone casual but laced with curiosity. "I'm taking a short break from work," Maya replied calmly. "What kind of work do you do?" His gaze shifted to her, his raised eyebrows betraying skepticism. "I'm a trauma surgeon," she replied matter-of-factly, meeting his gaze with calm professionalism. The man blinked, momentarily caught off guard. "A surgeon?" he repeated, as though the concept were foreign. "That's impressive, for someone your age." Maya's jaw tightened. She had heard similar remarks countless times before, often veiled in condescension. She chose her words carefully, keeping her tone polite but firm. "I've been practicing for nearly a decade," she said. "I completed my residency at New York Presbyterian Hospital." The man leaned back in his seat, a faint smirk on his face. "Must be nice," he remarked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "A first-class vacation in Miami. When I was starting out, I could barely afford a weekend at the beach." Maya felt the familiar sting of dismissal. It wasn't the first time her achievements had been undermined, but it still grated on her. "I've worked hard for this," she replied evenly. "It's important to prioritize self-care in a high-stress profession." "Self-care," he repeated, chuckling to himself. "That's what they're calling it these days, huh?" Maya fought the urge to roll her eyes. She had encountered men like him before, men who doubted her capabilities, her intelligence, her very presence in spaces they felt entitled to dominate. But she reminded herself that she had nothing to prove to him. As the flight attendants began their safety demonstrations, Maya leaned back in her seat, closing her eyes. She had no intention of engaging further with the man beside her. Little did she know, this flight would become far more eventful than she anticipated. The seeds of conflict. The man introduced himself as Travis Whitmore, the CEO of a large construction company. His booming voice carried across the cabin as he struck up conversations with other passengers, boasting about his achievements and making thinly veiled jabs at Maya's responses. As the plane ascended into the clouds, Maya focused on her book, determined to ignore his presence. But Travis seemed unable to resist making offhand comments. "You know," he said at one point, "back in my day, we didn't have all this privilege. People had to earn their way into seats like these." Maya clenched her jaw, biting back a retort. The implication was clear. He believed she hadn't earned her place here. Instead of reacting, she flipped a page in her book and smiled to herself. She had faced far greater challenges than an entitled CEO. But as the flight continued, the tension simmered, threatening to boil over. What neither Maya nor Travis knew was that their interaction would soon become the focal point of the entire flight, and leave an unforgettable impression on everyone aboard. This part sets the stage for a clash of personalities and values, highlighting the biases Maya has endured and the entitlement of Travis. The subsequent parts will explore how the situation escalates and how Maya's poise and resilience ultimately prevail. The encounter escalates. The flight had settled into its rhythm. The hum of the engines filled the cabin as passengers adjusted to the journey ahead. Maya tried to lose herself in her book, her thoughts drifting to the vacation she had planned. A rare opportunity to relax, she reminded herself. But the man beside her, Travis Whitmore, wasn't about to let her enjoy that peace. He continued to shift in his seat, his irritation palpable. The flight attendant had just offered drinks and snacks, and Maya, hoping for some quiet, politely asked for sparkling water. When it was Travis's turn, he ordered a whiskey on the rocks and then, without prompt, turned back to Maya. "So, a trauma surgeon, huh?" he said, the tone in his voice lingering somewhere between disbelief and dismissal. Maya nodded, choosing to keep her responses brief. "I don't mean to sound rude," he continued, though his words betrayed otherwise, "but isn't that unusual? I mean, for someone like you to get that far in a field like medicine. Must have been a lot of scholarships, right?" Maya felt her stomach tighten. She had learned over the years to handle microaggressions with grace, but Travis's comments were pushing her patience. She placed her book down and turned to face him, her expression calm but firm. "Yes, I earned scholarships," she said, her voice steady. "And I worked hard to get where I am. I spent years proving myself in one of the most demanding fields there is. So, yes, I've earned everything I have, including this seat." Travis chuckled, shaking his head as if he didn't believe her. "Relax," he said, waving his hand. "I'm just making conversation. No need to get defensive." Maya took a deep breath, reminding herself that she didn't owe him an explanation. She picked up her book again, hoping he'd take the hint and stop talking. But Travis wasn't finished. "It's just that, you know," he said, leaning closer, "medicine's such a competitive field. I'm surprised someone like you managed to break through. It must have been tough." "It was," Maya said curtly, keeping her eyes on the page. "And yet, here you are," Travis said, gesturing to the first-class cabin. "Living the dream, huh?" Maya had dealt with men like Travis before, men who felt the need to undermine her achievements, to question her capabilities. She had spent years proving herself in a field where her presence was often doubted. But this wasn't the operating room, and she wasn't going to waste her energy on someone who clearly had no intention of listening. She turned to him, her voice calm but pointed. "Yes, here I am," she said. "Because I earned it." Travis leaned back in his seat, his smirk widening. "Well, good for you," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. Maya returned to her book, ignoring the way Travis's comments hung in the air. She had no intention of letting him ruin her flight. But as the minutes ticked by, she couldn't help but feel the weight of his words. A flight interrupted. An hour into the flight, the cabin lights dimmed as passengers settled into their seats. Maya closed her book, finally feeling a sense of calm wash over her. She leaned back, her eyes drifting shut. But that calm was short-lived. A commotion broke out a few rows behind them. A passenger had collapsed, and the flight attendants rushed to assist. Maya's instincts kicked in immediately. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood, her professional demeanor taking over. "Is there a doctor on board?" one of the flight attendants called out. "I'm a doctor," Maya said, stepping into the aisle. The flight attendant's face lit up with relief. "Thank you, doctor. Please, follow me." Maya moved quickly toward the commotion, her training guiding her every step. The passenger, a man in his 60s, was slumped in his seat, his breathing shallow. Maya knelt beside him, assessing his condition with practiced precision. She asked the flight attendants for the medical kit and began working to stabilize the man. The passengers watched in silence, their earlier distractions forgotten. Even Travis, who had been so quick to question her presence, sat frozen in his seat, his eyes fixed on the scene unfolding before him. For Maya, nothing else mattered in that moment. The man's life was her priority, and she worked with unwavering focus. Her hands moved with precision, her voice calm and reassuring as she instructed the flight attendants. After several tense minutes, the man's breathing began to stabilize. Maya leaned back, her relief evident. She instructed the flight attendants to monitor him closely and ensure he was hydrated. The cabin erupted into applause as Maya returned to her seat. Passengers thanked her, their gratitude evident in their voices. But Maya simply nodded, her focus still on the man she had just helped. As she sat down, Travis turned to her, his expression unreadable. For the first time since the flight began, he was silent. "You're a doctor," he said finally, his voice quieter than before. "I told you that," Maya replied, her tone neutral. Travis nodded slowly, his earlier arrogance replaced by something that almost resembled respect. "I didn't think," he began, but his voice trailed off. Maya didn't respond. She didn't need to. The moment had spoken for itself. The turning point. The flight continued, but the atmosphere had shifted. Passengers who had overheard Travis's earlier remarks now looked at him with thinly veiled disapproval. Maya, however, remained composed, her focus on the book in her lap. Travis sat silently, his earlier bravado replaced by introspection. He glanced at Maya several times, as if trying to find the words to apologize, but he said nothing. For Maya, the incident was just another reminder of the challenges she faced every day. But it was also a testament to her strength in the moment of reflection. As the plane steadied after the mid-flight commotion, a quiet lull fell over the cabin. The passengers, still stirred by Dr. Maya Thompson's swift actions, whispered among themselves. Some exchanged glances, marveling at her composure. Others gave her nods of respect, as if acknowledging her as the hero she was. For Maya, it was just another day of doing what she had trained for, though the setting, a luxury aircraft thousands of feet above the ground, was far from her usual operating room. Meanwhile, Travis Whitmore sat stiffly in his seat, visibly unsettled. His earlier smug demeanor had vanished, replaced by an awkward tension. His whiskey sat untouched on the tray in front of him, the ice long since melted. Every so often, he glanced sideways at Maya, his face a blend of disbelief and something akin to regret. He had spent the earlier part of the flight questioning her presence in first class, her achievements, and her worth. Now, he was grappling with the reality that he had misjudged her, and badly. Breaking the ice, or attempting to. The silence between them stretched for what felt like hours. Finally, Travis shifted in his seat, clearing his throat awkwardly. About earlier," he began, his voice hesitant. Maya turned her head slightly, one eyebrow raised in question but not necessarily interest. "Yes. He hesitated, his usual confidence clearly shaken. "I think I may have underestimated you." Maya regarded him calmly, her expression giving nothing away. "That's one way to put it," she said, her tone measured but firm. Travis chuckled nervously, running a hand through his thinning hair. Look, I didn't mean to come off as rude. It's just, well, you're not exactly what I expected. Maya folded her arms, leaning back in her seat. And what exactly did you expect, Mr. Whitmore? He winced at her directness, his gaze dropping to his lap. I guess I expected someone different. You know, someone older, maybe a bit more, white. Maya finished for him, her voice devoid of malice but sharp enough to cut through his excuses. Travis flushed, his discomfort evident. I didn't mean it like that, he mumbled. Maya sighed, her patience thinning. You didn't mean it like that, but it's what you thought. People like me face these assumptions every day, Mr. Whitmore. We're constantly underestimated, constantly having to prove ourselves in ways others don't. And frankly, it's exhausting. Travis opened his mouth to respond but found he had no words. He sat back, his shoulders slumping under the weight of her truth. A history of challenges. As the tension between them hung in the air, Maya's thoughts drifted back to her journey. Growing up in a modest Harlem neighborhood, she had faced these biases her entire life. Teachers doubting her abilities, classmates underestimating her potential, professors expecting less from her, all these experiences had shaped her, hardened her resolve, and fueled her ambition. But the scars of those battles never truly faded. In medical de-resilience, a reminder that she was capable of rising above the biases and doubts of others. As the plane descended toward Miami, Maya felt a sense of accomplishment, not because she had proven herself to Travis, but because she had stayed true to herself. She had nothing to prove to anyone. And yet, she had persevered. Not for the validation of people like Travis, but for herself, her family, and the countless patients whose lives depended on her skill and dedication. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, a steady reminder of the lessons instilled in her from a young age. Maya, her mother had often said, you don't owe anyone an explanation for your success. You've earned your place in this world. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. With a steadying breath, Maya brought herself back to the present. Travis was still sitting beside her, his expression one of awkward introspection. A teachable moment. Instead of letting the conversation end in silence, Maya decided to take control of the narrative. She turned to face Travis fully, her posture confident but not confrontational. Mr. Whitmore, she began, her tone softer now but still firm, I don't expect you to fully understand what it's like to walk in my shoes. But I do hope this experience has made you think, about your assumptions, about your words, and about the impact they have. Travis nodded slowly, his gaze meeting hers. I think it has, he admitted. I won't lie, I've probably said and thought things like this more times than I care to admit. But seeing you in action back there, it was humbling, to say the least. Maya tilted her head slightly, studying him. And what will you do with that humility, she asked. Will you let it change you? Or will you let it fade the moment you step off this plane? Travis didn't answer immediately. He seemed to be grappling with the weight of her question, his brows furrowed in thought. Finally, he sighed, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. I'll try to do better, he said. I can't promise I'll get it right every time, but I'll try. Maya nodded, satisfied for now. That's all anyone can ask, she said. The ripple effect. As the flight continued, the mood in the cabin gradually lightened. The other passengers, who had been quietly observing the exchange, now seemed more at ease. A few even approached Maya to thank her for her earlier efforts, their words genuine and heartfelt. One woman, seated a few rows ahead, leaned over as she passed by. You're an inspiration, she said with a warm smile. Thank you for everything you do. Maya returned the smile, her heart swelling with a mixture of pride and gratitude. Moments like this reminded her why she had chosen this path, why she continued to push through the challenges and prejudices she faced. Even Travis, who had spent the first half of the flight undermining her, seemed to have undergone a transformation. He no longer spoke with arrogance or condescension. Instead, he listened, truly listened, to the conversations around him, his demeanor far more subdued. For Maya, the flight was a microcosm of the larger battles she and so many others faced every day. It was a reminder that change, however small, was possible. And though the road ahead was long, she was determined to keep walking it, with her head held high and her purpose unwavering. The conversation that sparked change. The cabin hummed with a quiet tension as the passengers settled back into their seats. The initial chaos and adrenaline had faded, leaving only the soft murmur of conversation and the occasional clinking of glasses. Dr. Maya Thompson was grateful for the brief respite, yet she knew the events of the past hour weren't over, not for her, not for Travis Whitmore, and not for the other passengers who had witnessed it all. Travis, seated beside her, appeared deep in thought. The CEO who had once exuded an air of arrogance now sat subdued, his gaze fixed on the tray table in front of him. His earlier attempts at making amends had been clumsy at best, and Maya could sense he was struggling with how to proceed. She considered leaving him to his thoughts, but something compelled her to speak. "You seem lost in thought, Mr. Whitmore," Maya said, her tone even but not unkind. Travis looked up, startled. He hesitated, as if weighing his words, before responding. "I guess I am," he admitted. "I've been thinking about everything. About what you said. About what happened back there." Maya nodded, encouraging him to continue. "I've been in first class more times than I can count," he said, his voice low. "But today, it felt like I was seeing it for the first time. Seeing how people like me, how I, can judge someone without even realizing it. It's unsettling." Maya leaned back in her seat, folding her hands in her lap. "Unsettling is a good start," she said. "But what matters is what you do with that feeling. It's easy to feel uncomfortable in the moment and then move on without changing a thing." Travis's brow furrowed. "You make it sound so simple. Change isn't easy." "No, it's not," Maya agreed. "But neither is living every day under the weight of prejudice. Neither is having to prove yourself over and over, just to be seen as worthy of the same respect others." A lesson in perspective. Travis shifted in his seat, clearly grappling with her words. Maya decided to offer him a glimpse into her world, something she rarely did, but felt was necessary in this moment. "When I was in medical school," she began, "I was one of only a handful of black students in my class. Every day, I felt the weight of being different. Professors would double-check my answers as if they couldn't believe I was right. Patients would request a real doctor when they saw me walk into the room. Even some of my peers would make comments, subtle but cutting, questioning whether I belonged there." She paused, letting her words sink in. "I worked harder than anyone else because I had to. Not because I wanted to prove them wrong, but because I knew the stakes were higher for me. One mistake, and it wouldn't just be, Maya made a mistake. It would be, maybe people like her don't belong in medicine." Travis looked at her, his expression a mixture of shame and curiosity. "That's a lot to carry," he said quietly. "It is," Maya replied. "And it doesn't end once you've made it. Even as a trauma surgeon, I still encounter people who assume I'm less competent because of the color of my skin or my gender." "Like you did." Travis flinched at her bluntness but didn't argue. "I didn't mean to." Maya held up a hand, stopping him. "I know. That's the problem. You didn't mean to, but you did. And I'm not saying this to make you feel guilty, Mr. Whitmore. I'm saying it because you have the power to change, to do better, not just for yourself, but for the people who look up to you." A turning point. Travis nodded slowly, his gaze thoughtful. "You know," he said after a moment, "I built my company from nothing. I like to think I know what it means to work hard, to overcome obstacles. But hearing your story, it puts things in perspective. My struggles don't compare to what you faced. It's not a competition, Maya said gently. Everyone faces challenges. What matters is how we use our experiences to grow, to create a better world for those who come after us. Travis looked at her, his eyes earnest. I want to do that, he said. But I don't know where to start. Maya smiled faintly. Start by listening. By challenging your assumptions. By recognizing the biases you hold, even the ones you don't realize are there. And when you see someone being treated unfairly, speak up. Use your privilege to amplify voices that might otherwise go unheard. Travis nodded again, his resolve growing. I can do that, he said. I will do that. The ripple effect. Their conversation was interrupted by a flight attendant who approached Maya with a warm smile. Dr. Thompson, she said, the captain asked me to let you know that the passenger you assisted earlier is stable and resting comfortably. He also wanted me to thank you again for your quick thinking. Maya nodded graciously. Thank you for the update, she said. The attendant turned to Travis, her demeanor professional but slightly cooler. Mr. Whitmore, would you like another drink? Travis hesitated, then shook his head. No, thank you, he said, his voice quieter than usual. As the attendant walked away, Travis turned back to Maya. You really are remarkable, he said. Not just as a doctor, but as a person. Maya gave him a small smile. I'm just doing my job, she said. But thank you. Travis sat back, his expression contemplative. For the first time in a long time, he felt humbled, not by wealth or power, but by the strength and grace of a woman who had every reason to hold a grudge but chose instead to educate and inspire. A glimpse of hope. As the flight neared its destination, Maya and Travis continued to talk. Their conversation shifted from heavy topics to lighter ones, books they enjoyed, places they had traveled, dreams for the future. By the time the plane began its descent, there was a sense of mutual respect between them, a connection forged through honesty and vulnerability. When the plane landed, Travis stood and extended a hand to Maya. Thank you, he said, his voice sincere. For everything. Maya shook his hand, her grip firm. Take care, Mr. Whitmore. And remember, change starts with you. As she walked down the aisle, passengers nodded to her, some even applauding quietly. Maya felt a sense of fulfillment, knowing she had not only saved a life that day but also planted a seed of change in the mind of a man who could make a difference. For Travis, the flight was more than a journey, it was a wake-up call. And for Maya, it was a reminder that even in the face of prejudice, there was always an opportunity to educate, to inspire, and to pave the way for a better future. A journey of reflection and redemption. As the plane soared above the clouds, the rhythmic hum of the engines created a calm that contrasted with the emotional whirlwind within Travis Whitmore. He stared out the window, his reflection staring back at him in the dimly lit glass, a man grappling with truths he had long ignored. The conversations with Dr. Maya Thompson replayed in his mind, each word peeling back layers of his carefully constructed identity. The arrogance, the entitlement, the dismissiveness, all of it had been laid bare. For the first time in years, Travis felt small, not in wealth, not in stature, but in understanding. He had always prided himself on his achievements, believing that his hard work and tenacity had carried him to success. But Maya's story had revealed the cracks in his perspective. Her quiet strength, her unwavering resilience in the face of prejudice, had forced him to confront his own biases, the ones he didn't even realize he carried. The weight of silence. Across the aisle, Maya sat with her eyes closed, her breathing even as she rested. Travis observed her, marveling at her composure. Despite everything she had endured, his initial dismissal, the ordeal with the passenger in medical distress, the countless microaggressions she had faced throughout her career, she remained unshaken. Her calm was not born of indifference but of experience, a hard-earned ability to navigate a world that often refused to see her worth. Travis thought about his own life, the boardrooms where his voice was always heard, the networks that opened doors for him without question. He had never had to prove his right to be in a room, never had to justify his presence in a seat of power. And yet, he had used that privilege to belittle someone whose accomplishments dwarfed his own. The silence around him grew heavy as the weight of his actions settled in his chest. He glanced at the flight attendants moving through the cabin, their smiles professional but distant. He wondered what they thought of him now. Had they noticed the change in his demeanor? Did they see the cracks in his facade? The unexpected advocate. As Travis wrestled with his thoughts, a young woman seated a few rows back approached Maya. She was petite, with curly hair and glasses that framed her thoughtful eyes. "Excuse me, Dr. Thompson," she said softly, her voice tinged with awe. "I just wanted to say thank you, for what you did earlier and for how you handled everything." Maya opened her eyes and smiled warmly. "Thank you," she replied. "But there's no need to thank me. I was just doing my job." The woman shook her head. "It's not just about the medical emergency. The way you stood your ground, the way you carried yourself, it was inspiring. People like me need role models like you." Maya's smile widened, and she gestured for the woman to take the seat beside her. "What's your name?" she asked. "Danielle," the woman replied, her cheeks flushing with excitement. "I'm a medical student. 3rd year. And honestly, seeing you up here, it makes me feel like I belong." Maya's eyes softened. "Danielle, you absolutely belong. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise. Medicine needs people like you, people who bring their whole selves to the profession, who challenge the status quo." Their conversation continued, filled with laughter and shared experiences. Travis listened intently, feeling like an intruder but unable to look away. The admiration in Danielle's eyes, the mentorship in Maya's tone, it was a dynamic he had never experienced but one that filled him with a strange sense of hope. The ripple effect. As the plane began its descent, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing their impending arrival. Passengers stirred, gathering their belongings and preparing for the journey's end. Travis, however, felt as though his journey was just beginning. He turned to Maya as the flight attendant passed by, collecting trash and handing out mints. "Dr. Thompson," he began, his voice hesitant. "Could I have a moment?" Maya looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Of course," she said. Travis cleared his throat, struggling to find the right words. I owe you an apology. Not just for how I treated you, but for how I've treated people like you, people I didn't bother to see." Maya tilted her head, her gaze steady. "Go on." "I've spent my life surrounded by privilege," he admitted. "I thought I understood hard work because I built my company from the ground up. But what I've faced doesn't compare to what you've endured. I see that now. And I want to do better, not just for myself, but for the people who look up to me." Maya nodded slowly. "Acknowledging the problem is the first step," she said. "But change requires action, Mr. Whitmore. It's not enough to feel bad or to apologize. You have to do the work." "I will," Travis promised. "I don't know where to start, but I'm willing to learn." Maya studied him for a moment before extending her hand. "Then let this be your first step," she said. "Take what you've learned here and use it to make a difference." Travis shook her hand, his grip firm but reverent. "Thank you," he said. "For everything. A new beginning." As the plane touched down and taxied to the gate, the passengers began to disembark. Travis watched as Maya and Danielle exchanged contact information, the younger woman beaming with gratitude. He lingered, allowing others to exit first, until finally, it was his turn. As he stepped off the plane and into the bustling airport terminal, Travis felt a sense of clarity he hadn't experienced in years. The world around him seemed brighter, sharper, as if he were seeing it for the first time. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, he felt ready to walk it. Maya, meanwhile, walked through the terminal with her head held high, her stride confident. She had faced yet another challenge and emerged stronger for it. And though she didn't know what impact her words would have on Travis Whitmore's life, she knew she had planted a seed. Whether it would grow was up to him. In the end, the flight was more than a journey from one city to another. It was a journey of transformation, of reflection, and of hope. For Maya, for Travis, and for everyone who witnessed their interaction, it was a reminder that even in the face of prejudice, change is always possible. The catalyst for change. The airport terminal buzzed with the usual cacophony of footsteps, hurried announcements, and the hum of conversation. Maya walked through the crowded terminal with her usual grace, her carry-on rolling behind her, Danielle by her side. They continued their discussion about medicine, Danielle brimming with enthusiasm as Maya shared pearls of wisdom. Yet, Maya couldn't shake the subtle weight of her exchange with Travis. It wasn't the first time she had encountered someone who underestimated her based on race or gender, but his apology, tentative and sincere, lingered in her thoughts. Behind her, Travis Whitmore followed at a distance, his steps slower than usual. He wasn't accustomed to the feeling of vulnerability that now clung to him. The confident facade he wore like armor had been shattered, leaving him exposed yet strangely hopeful. He paused near a coffee shop, watching Maya and Danielle disappear into the bustling crowd. For the first time in years, he felt compelled to act, not out of ego or necessity, but out of an earnest desire to grow. A conversation with purpose. Mr. Whitmore. A familiar voice called his name, and he turned to see Sarah, the flight attendant, hurrying toward him. Her cheeks flushed as she stopped a few steps away. "Sir, I just wanted to say. I saw everything that happened on the flight, and I was impressed with how you handled it toward the end. It's not easy to admit fault." Travis sighed, shaking his head. "I didn't handle it well at all, Sarah. But that's going to change. I've spent too much of my life looking down on people like Dr. Thompson, not because of who they are, but because of who I've been. That ends today." Sarah nodded, her expression softening. "If I may, sir, I think it's admirable that you're willing to learn. Most people in your position wouldn't even try." Travis gave her a small, rueful smile. "It's not about being admirable, it's about being accountable. And I have a lot to account for. A public platform, a private resolve." By the time Travis reached his hotel later that evening, the events of the day had gone viral. Clips of the confrontation on the flight, taken by passengers, were spreading across social media. While some praised Maya's composure and professionalism, others criticized Travis's initial behavior. The hashtag #RespectMaya was trending, accompanied by calls for systemic change in corporate spaces. Sitting in the quiet of his hotel room, Travis stared at his phone, reading the comments. They stung, but he knew they were deserved. The world wasn't just holding him accountable, it was demanding more. He reached for his laptop and began typing an open letter, one he intended to share publicly. He wrote about his own biases, his upbringing, and the blind spots that had allowed him to perpetuate the very inequality he now sought to dismantle. He didn't sugarcoat his actions or make excuses. Instead, he promised to use his platform to advocate for inclusivity and to listen to those whose voices had been ignored for too long. As he finished the letter, he felt a strange sense of relief. It wasn't redemption, he knew that would take time and effort, but it was a step in the right direction. An unexpected call. The following morning, Maya was sipping her coffee in a quiet cafe when her phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar, but she answered anyway. "Dr. Thompson?" Travis's voice came through, hesitant but steady. "Mr. Whitmore," Maya replied, surprised. "What can I do for you?" "I wanted to thank you," he began, "not just for what you did on the flight, but for opening my eyes. I've spent the last 24 hours reflecting, and I realize now how much work I have to do, not just as a CEO, but as a person." Maya listened silently, her coffee forgotten. "That's good to hear," she said after a moment. But words only go so far, Mr. Whitmore. Change requires action. I know, he said. That's why I'm calling. I want to collaborate with you. I want to use my resources to support the causes you care about, diversity in medicine, mentorship programs, anything you think would make a difference. Maya's eyebrows lifted in surprise. She had heard promises like this before, but there was something in Travis's tone that made her believe he was sincere. I'll think about it, she said. But understand this, Mr. Whitmore, this isn't about optics. If we're going to work together, it has to be real, tangible change. Understood, Travis said. And, Dr. Thompson, thank you. For everything. The ripple effect. Over the next few months, Travis made good on his promise. His company launched initiatives to promote diversity and inclusion, not just within its own walls but in the communities it served. He partnered with Maya to fund scholarships for underrepresented students pursuing careers in medicine, and he personally mentored young professionals from diverse backgrounds, sharing the lessons he had learned the hard way. Maya, meanwhile, continued to excel in her field, using her platform to advocate for equity and inspire the next generation of doctors. The partnership with Travis wasn't without its challenges, but she remained steadfast, ensuring that their efforts were meaningful and impactful. Their story became a beacon of hope, proving that even the most entrenched biases could be dismantled with humility, accountability, and a willingness to change. It wasn't a fairy tale, there were no easy answers or quick fixes, but it was a testament to the power of resilience and the possibility of redemption. The legacy of a moment. Years later, as Maya stood on the stage of a packed auditorium, addressing a room full of aspiring doctors, she reflected on the journey that had brought her there. Travis sat in the audience, a quiet supporter, his presence a reminder of how far they had come. In every challenge lies an opportunity, Maya said, her voice clear and strong. An opportunity to learn, to grow, and to create change. The road isn't easy, but it's worth it. And together, we can make the world a better place, not just for ourselves, but for those who come after us. The audience erupted in applause, their faces filled with hope and determination. And as Maya stepped off the stage, she knew that the work was far from over, but she also knew that she wasn't alone. Together, they were building a legacy, one step at a time.